Iran just threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz if oil sanctions tighten further. That is not a diplomatic warning. That is a promise backed by naval assets already in position. Most people think this is empty posturing. In reality, closing that strait would cut off 20% of the world's oil supply within 72 hours and send crude prices toward $200 per barrel. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard confirmed yesterday they have deployed fast attack boats and anti-ship missiles along the Hormuz chokepoint. Global markets ignored it. Insurance underwriters did not. Lloyd's of London just doubled premiums for tankers transiting Iranian waters. That is not speculation. That is institutional actors pricing in a blockade scenario they believe is coming. In the next couple of minutes, I will show you what Iran is actually positioning to do, why Western intelligence agencies are monitoring this in real time, and what happens to global energy markets if even one tanker gets hit. Quick, before we continue, thanks a lot for tuning in. Your support is what keeps this show going, and I appreciate you watching. Please make sure you are subscribed and like the video so more people get to see this. Now let us get to it. Iran has threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz 7 times since 1984. 6 of those threats were political theater. 1 was not. In 1988, during the tanker war, Iranian naval forces mined the strait and attacked neutral shipping. The U.S. Navy responded with Operation Praying Mantis and destroyed half of Iran's operational surface fleet in a single day. That memory shapes how Western analysts view Iranian threats today. They assume Tehran learned its lesson. They assume Iran will never risk direct confrontation over oil transit again. That assumption is now being tested. The difference this time is leverage. In 1988, global oil markets had spare capacity. OPEC could replace Iranian disruption within weeks. In 2026, there is no spare capacity. OPEC Plus is producing at maximum sustainable output. The United States Strategic Petroleum Reserve sits at a 40-year low after releases in 2022 and 2023. China holds a 90-day emergency supply and is not sharing it. That means any sustained closure of Hormuz cannot be offset by releasing stockpiles or increasing production elsewhere. The math is simple. 21 million barrels per day transit the Strait of Hormuz. Global consumption is 102 million barrels per day. Lose Hormuz and you lose 20% of supply with zero backup. Prices do not climb gradually in that scenario. They spike vertically. Here is what Iran is positioning to do. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy has forward-deployed 12 Ghadir-class midget submarines to the Strait of Hormuz over the past 14 days. These are not blue water vessels. They are designed specifically for shallow choke point operations. Each submarine carries 2 torpedoes and can lay mines. U.S. Fifth Fleet confirms the deployments, but has not publicly characterized them as preparation for blockade. That silence is deliberate. Announcing Iranian intent would destabilize oil futures before Washington is ready to respond. Satellite imagery from Maxar Technologies shows 3 Shahid Soleimani-class catamaran fast attack craft staged at Bandar Abbas Naval Base. These vessels are equipped with vertical launch cells for anti-ship cruise missiles. Range is 300 kilometers. That covers the entire width of the Strait of Hormuz and extends into the Gulf of Oman. Iran does not need to sink tankers to stop traffic. It needs to hit one. The moment a tanker takes a missile strike in Hormuz, insurance becomes unavailable. Every commercial operator will reroute or anchor. Traffic stops without a single additional shot. Iran knows this. Western naval commanders know this. The global shipping industry is pricing it in right now. Clarkson's research reported that fixture rates for very large crude carriers transiting the Persian Gulf increased 42% in the past 10 days. That is the market telling you blockade risk is real. The Strait of Hormuz is 39 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. Shipping lanes are 6 kilometers wide total, 3 kilometers inbound, 3 kilometers outbound. Tankers move at 12 knots through the strait. Transit time is roughly 90 minutes. During that window, vessels are exposed to shore-based anti-ship missile batteries, fast attack craft operating from concealed coastal positions, and subsurface mining. Iran has practiced this scenario in at least 4 major naval exercises since 2019. The most recent was Exercise Great Prophet 17 in December 2022. Iranian forces simulated closing the strait using a combination of swarming fast boats, missile salvos, and mine deployment. Western analysts dismissed it as propaganda footage. The tactical execution was sound. Iran demonstrated coordinated saturation attack capability against a hypothetical carrier strike group. The U.S. Navy has not publicly war-gamed a strait closure scenario since 2012. That simulation concluded that reopening Hormuz after a full Iranian blockade would require a minimum of 30 days and involve sustained air and naval combat operations. Casualty estimates were classified. Oil price projections were not. The 2012 simulation estimated crude would hit $180 per barrel within 2 weeks of closure. That was when global demand was lower and spare capacity existed. Adjust for 2026 conditions, and the number moves past 200. Stay with me because this has happened before, and the consequences were contained only because the global economy had options it no longer has. In 1984, Iraq began attacking Iranian oil exports during the Iran-Iraq War. Iran responded by attacking neutral tankers carrying oil from Arab states supporting Iraq. Between 1984 and 1988, Iran and Iraq attacked 546 merchant vessels in the Persian Gulf. 83 of those were tankers. Global oil prices spiked from $28 per barrel to $42 per barrel in less than 6 months. The crisis ended when the U.S. Navy intervened directly, reflagged Kuwaiti tankers as American vessels, and escorted them through the strait. Iran backed down. That solution worked in 1988 because Iran was isolated, militarily weakened, and had no regional allies capable of complicating U.S. operations. None of those conditions apply today. Iran is not isolated. It supplies drones to Russia. It coordinates with Hezbollah in Lebanon. It supports Houthi operations in Yemen that have already disrupted Red Sea shipping. If Iran closes Hormuz, it will do so as part of a multi-theater strategy designed to stretch U.S. naval assets thin. The Fifth Fleet cannot simultaneously escort convoys through Hormuz, suppress Houthi missile threats in Bab el-Mandeb, and maintain freedom of navigation patrols in the South China Sea. Something breaks. That is the gamble Tehran is making. Now, towards the end here, I want to show you what happens when the oil stops moving. $200 oil does not just mean expensive gasoline. It means supply chain collapse. Diesel fuel powers freight transport. Jet fuel moves goods by air. Bunker fuel runs container ships. When crude hits $200, refined product prices follow within days. Trucking companies start parking fleets. Airlines cancel routes. Shipping lines impose emergency surcharges that double the cost of moving containers. Grocery stores cannot restock. Hospitals run low on supplies. Heating oil becomes unaffordable in winter months. This is not theoretical. Sri Lanka experienced this exact cascade in 2022 when it could no longer afford fuel imports. The country ran out of diesel. Public transportation stopped. Food distribution collapsed. The government fell. Sri Lanka is a nation of 22 million people. Scale that disruption to Europe, to Japan, to economies dependent on energy imports they can no longer afford or physically receive, and you are looking at systemic breakdown. Iran does not need to keep the strait closed for months. It needs to keep it closed long enough to break Western resolve on sanctions. That threshold could be as short as 2 weeks. 2 weeks of traffic stopped in Hormuz, and European governments face riots over energy prices. Industrial production halts. Recession becomes depression. At that point, sanctions relief becomes the politically survivable option. That is the pressure Iran is attempting to create. And here's the contradiction nobody wants to address. If Iran closes Hormuz, the United States will have to reopen it by force. That means striking Iranian naval assets, missile sites, and command infrastructure. It means casualties. It means combat footage on social media that no administration wants to defend in an election year. But if the United States does not respond with overwhelming force, it signals to every regional actor that American security guarantees are negotiable. Saudi Arabia watches, the UAE watches, Israel watches. If Washington blinks on Hormuz, those allies start making independent arrangements with Tehran because they cannot rely on American protection. The entire Gulf security architecture collapses. That is the strategic trap. Iran knows the U.S. cannot afford to let the strait stay closed. Iran also knows the U.S. cannot afford the political cost of the military operation required to reopen it. So Tehran is testing how far it can push before Washington decides the cost of action is lower than the cost of inaction. We are approaching that decision point right now. The Biden administration has not commented on Iranian deployments. The Pentagon has not announced increased naval presence in the Gulf. That silence is not restraint. It is calculation. They are deciding whether to preempt or respond. Either choice leads to conflict. Here is what you need to understand. Iran is not bluffing this time because it has nothing left to lose. Sanctions have already crushed its economy. Inflation is running at 40%. Youth unemployment is above 30%. The regime faces internal unrest and has exhausted non-escalatory options. Closing the strait is not about winning. It is about forcing negotiation from a position of maximum disruption. That is a different calculation than the one Western analysts are used to modeling. Most people think markets will calm down once the diplomatic process restarts. In reality, the damage will already be done. Insurance rates will not return to pre-crisis levels, even if the strait reopens. Shipping companies will price in permanent risk premiums. Energy consumers will pay those costs for years, and the precedent will be set. If Iran successfully uses the strait as a coercive tool once, it will use it again. Every future sanctions package will carry the implicit threat of another closure. That is not a market distortion you can hedge against. That is structural instability built into global energy flows. And nobody in Washington, Brussels, or Beijing has a plan to prevent it that does not involve military force. That is not a war with an exit strategy. That is a war running on momentum. And momentum does not negotiate. Thanks a lot for watching. I really appreciate your support. Join the discussion in the comments below. Let me know your thoughts. Do you think Iran will actually close the Strait of Hormuz, or is this another round of threats that will fade? And what should the U.S. response be if Tehran follows through? Let me know. Please subscribe and like the video if you want to stay updated. And click the video on the screen to see another. I will see you soon.